Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast. Now, we're all aware that proper nutrition plays a critical role in determining our physical health. But today we're speaking to clinical nutritionist Anthony Hartcher to learn more about how it impacts our mental health too. Specializing in mental health, children's health, and body transformation, Anthony is a firm believer in treating the whole person, ensuring all aspects of well-being are addressed and supported. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing today?
Oh, fantastic, Marie. So great to be on your show. And thank you for inviting me on your show. And I look forward to imparting my wisdom with the listeners.
Thank you for joining us. Now, we've heard a bit about your ethos and approach when it comes to nutrition, but could you elaborate a little bit more on that? What does it mean to treat the whole person, and what are the various aspects of well-being that can be addressed in the context of nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely, Marie. It's a great question. Because everyone's unique and individual, everyone has a unique DNA sequence, and we need to be treated that way. We need to be treated as individuals, and as an individual, we have different goals. And so I'm working with the clients and their goals, and then looking at the whole. And so what do I mean by the whole? It's encompassing all aspects of health and well-being. So it's the whole, even down to sunlight. So the amount of sunlight exposure, the amount of blue light exposure they're getting through their electronic devices, nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress levels, all these aspects go hand in hand. Even like the exposure to toxic chemicals from the environment. So I'm looking at all aspects that could be implicating their health and well-being, as well as understanding them as a person, not only their goals, but their why. So what's their why? What's their driver? What's their motivation behind what they do? And linking that why to their health goals, because without a why, it just won't happen. So with a strong why, they'll do anything. they'll make it happen. So it's really understanding them as a person, as an individual, and then encompassing all the aspects that I spoke about in terms of overall wellness and building up a wellness plan. So that incorporates nutrition.
That's fascinating to me that everything just intertwines with nutrition. And that's also a great preface for our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Anthony Hartcher? My first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
It's a great question, because in terms of my answer, I actually don't have the book, just the one book. I have many books. When you ask that question, the first one that came to mind is Think and Grow Rich, and it ties into mental health and I've always been on this journey of improving or wanting to improve my mental health, and now I'm out there helping others improve their mental health. So Think and Grow Rich is the first, by Napoleon Hill, is the first book that comes to mind, but it's a compilation, like I've read so many books over the years. I'm still reading them now, and it never ends. And
for sure.
And they all play a part in who I am today, in my, personal development and as a person. So it's hard to single out one book. It's like, it is very much like nutrition. And we'll get into that, obviously, but nutrition, when people want to focus on one aspect of nutrition, it doesn't work. You focus on one thing, it just doesn't work.
For sure.
And it's the combination of many, and doing them consistently is where we get the best results.
That's such a reasonable answer. But I'm really curious to know, with the book Think and Grow Rich that you've just mentioned, what is your favorite thing about the book?
It's really the just deep insight into humans and how they think and how they can use their thinking to develop themselves. So it's probably that. And I read that I was quite young. I mean, I'm in my 40s now, but back then it was in my 20s, so a good 20 years ago. And it stood out to me because prior to that, it was all maths textbooks and English textbooks and science textbooks and nothing about how to think. And so it was the first really personal development book I picked up, or one of the first, and it really stood out to me as, wow, like our brain's so amazing, and in terms of what we can do with it and what we can achieve with it. So I really wanted to understand it more, and it really, I guess, initiated that wanting to learn more about the brain.
It sounds like there's a little bit of sentimental value there for you with the book as well. But if you were in an elevator and you had to persuade someone, like the person with you in the elevator, to read this book, what would you say in that 30 seconds?
I'd ask them if they want to achieve their aspirations, their goals, and this would be a great starting point to them achieving what they wanted to achieve in life.
Mm-hmm. That is convincing. I'm convinced. I will read the book. Now, as for movies, what have you been watching recently?
I actually don't watch my movie. I'm probably living out my own movie. So, I actually spend very little time watching television. So like the last one I can remember was I watched Spider-Man with my son, Ollie. So that's the last movie I watched, and it was probably more that I wanted to spend time with him. And other than that, I don't watch movies.
That's very fair. I mean, we live in such like a technologically oriented society now as well. It's pretty difficult to get away from screens and to go and watch, look at a screen during your pastime when, you spend most of the day already looking at a screen. It can get a bit much, but is there one in your lifetime that is close to your heart at all?
It would be documentaries. Mm-hmm. So I'm very much a non-fiction person. I've never really been drawn to fiction. So in terms of non-fiction documentaries, I'm just trying to think of one that stands out. It's probably stumped me actually because as I said, they all play a role in who I am today. Sure.
What kind of documentaries do you tend to veer towards?
Very much science-based, health-based documentaries, and ones where a person's achieved remarkable results in whatever field, just incredible that they've excelled themselves. And so I'm really interested. Like the latest book I'm reading is Elon Musk's book. He's an inspiration to me.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. So as for podcasts, are there any that you're listening to at the moment?
Yeah, there is. I'm listening to Dr. John DeMartini, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Jack Cruz, and also the Andrew Huberman podcast.
And what do you find interesting about these podcasts? What keeps you listening?
It's probably the learning element. I'm a very curious person, extremely curious, and I get really, really curious in the areas that I love, such as health, science, and they spark that curiosity because they have a deep understanding of this subject matter. So I think that's what it is that they're experts in their fields, and I really want to tap into their brains and to elevate my thinking. Yeah,
that's a great quality to have. And do you have a role model that you've looked up to in your life, either professionally or personally, that you kind of take your traits from or like get inspired by?
Well, initially, definitely, when I was growing up, it was my father. And then in my 20s, it was probably Anthony Robbins that really got me into personal development. And in my 30s, I was really into financial markets and understanding financial well-being. Also around health. So my health role models would be Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. John Demartini, and now Dr. John Cruz now, Jack Cruz, Dr. Jack Cruz. So they're the ones that I'm really following now, and they're probably the role models. But it's never really one. It's generally, probably it was my father when I was growing up, but now it's sort of many.
And what are the qualities of your role models that have inspired you?
It's them aspiring to be the best they can be in the area that they really love and inspired to work in. So that's really the strong quality, is that they're just the best of the best in their field. And I've got a strong interest in that field, and I want to get better. And so that's what really inspires me, because all of these people that I've just mentioned are hardworking. They work, long hours, 7 days a week, extreme hours actually. But they're just so driven in their field and making a difference in their field. And that's what really inspires me, because I'm very much wanting to make a difference in my field.
And it sounds like the passion drives you a lot as well. So that's a great point to get at for someone who wants to be driven and hardworking in the field. And my last question for you before we end off this section is there a course that you've taken in your lifetime that has stuck with you and made an impact on you?
Just like the book, there's so many. Like all these courses that I've taken have really shaped me to who I am today. Like I started out, finishing school, I wasn't a great student at school because the subjects didn't really interest me, or I didn't see the relevance of the subjects that I was doing to what I really liked doing. When I went to university, I studied chemical engineering, and that was a great course. I really loved the science in that course, and it was the pragmatic, element of that course, applying the course in everyday life. And then I went out in the field and as a chemical engineer and put that into practice and really enjoyed the work. But then I was really drawn back to health, and I went back and studied health. I did a nutrition degree, a complementary medicine degree. They were great courses. I learned a lot from them, and now I'm constantly learning. I recently done Dr. John Demartini's facilitator course, and yes, I'm a trained facilitator in his methodology, and constantly evolving my learning.
Yeah, it's really gratifying to be a lifelong learner. So I can definitely agree with you there. Thank you so much for sharing about yourself. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. Now we're moving on to the interview section. And my first question for you is something that we ask all of our guests. We feel like different people have different perceptions or ideas on what personal development is. So we'd love to get your definition on personal development.
Yeah, it's the evolution of one being their most authentic self.
Absolutely. And in terms of nutrition, how would you define nutrition, and how does it relate or tie into our personal development?
Yeah, so nutrition is essentially nourishment for the body so that the person can be their best version of themselves and live out that most authentic version and live an inspired life. So that is the nourishment in all forms of nourishment. So there's a nutritional element to that, but there's other forms of nourishment that we need to evolve.
Yep. And what are some common misconceptions about the relationship between nutrition and mental health that you've encountered?
Definitely misinformation. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And also on top of that, and probably the first and foremost, is labeling of food. So food labeling. And what do I mean by labeling? It's when we're told that this food's good and this food's bad, and we categorize it as good or bad. And at the end of the day, it's just a label. And with anything, they've got both sides. With anything in life, it's got two sides. There's a pro to it, there's a con to it, and everything's got two sides. And I just don't like the polarization that's created through labeling, because what it's doing is setting us up for eating disorders and disordered eating. And I see a lot of that in practice, and I don't like it. And it's because we've really polarized the thinking around nutrition, saying that this is good and this is bad. And often we call things, we say things are bad, and then the next week, the next month, or within the next decade, they're good. Okay, so it just creates all this confusion out there.
And how do you identify when something is misinformation or disinformation? Are there any trusted online sources that you'd personally recommend?
Well, personally, I go to journals and institutions, like educational institutions that are looking like that. They haven't got a commercial motive there other than to get education out there and to facilitate people's education. So I want to get away from the sort of the .com sort of commercialization, but then again, that's generalization. There is some really good .com sources, but I'm really wanting to get to the source of the information and where that information comes from. Does it come from a scientific journal, or is it just from an influencer? So I'm always looking deep down, digging deep down as to the credibility, and even scientific journals can be biased. So it's then looking for the authors and whether they've got any links to the funding, or if there's a certain funder behind the publication, and looking for all these interlinkages, because that's where we can get misinformation.
For sure. That takes a lot of time, a great deal of time and effort, actually. So could you tell us a bit about what key nutrients play a role in supporting our cognitive function and emotional well-being?
Yeah, so the brain's composition is predominantly fat. It's 60% fat. And then there's protein and water and the other minerals that make up the brain. So in essence, we need fat in our diet. And so as much as fat has been demonized in the past, it is essential for the nervous system. It is essential for the brain, essential for mental health, and it's essential for every cell in our body. So this is where I get a bit stuck, is in terms of people asking me for, is there particular nutrients I need to focus on? I always get back to the whole. So yes, we need fats, and ideally the fats that we cannot manufacture ourselves. And that's the essential fats, which are the omegas, the omega 3 and 6s, essentially, the essential fatty acids. So we need them in our diet. We need protein, and in particular, the essential amino acids. They're the amino acids that we can't manufacture ourselves. And through having a nice non-restrictive diet, then we're going to get those essential amino acids. We're going to get those essential fatty acids. When we start restricting our diet, we start doing any sort of diet, there's generally an elimination of a food group, and that catches up with us. So on top of the protein and fat, we also need B vitamins. We need minerals. So we need the magnesium, we need the sodium, potassium, we need chloride, so we need all the minerals associated, with, our nervous system. So there's nothing really one thing, it's many.
Yeah. So it sounds like creating a balanced, diverse diet is really important, and that's the main thing. What would be your recommendation for practices that can help with balancing out the diet? Is there like a breakdown of like veg to meat to rice that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And when you get down to the science at the subatomic level, it starts to open up a whole can of worms. So it really depends on where you are in the world as to what you need to eat. And this is the difficult thing we have like such huge migration throughout the world. And so really our microbiome and our our genes are very tied to where we originated from. And so eating the food of your origination is ideal. But then if you're living outside of that origination, then what can affect that is the different light environments. And so your body's getting confused about its circadian rhythm. And, one of the cues of the circadian rhythm is the food that we eat. So what I recommend is really not excluding foods and really embracing, I guess, that diet that resonates well with you, that eating that resonates well with you. So it's foods that digest well for you. So if foods don't digest well, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with that. You either have an intolerance to it, or particularly it could be an allergen, for example. So they're the foods that you want to be, I guess, staying away from, but getting professional help, because if you just stay away from it and think, it'll just take care of itself, you could be creating a nutritional deficiency. So I really, in terms of like ratios, generally like half the plate of vegetables, lots of, green, leafy greens, a few colors in there. And then we want to be having a good portion of fat and protein. So the essential fatty acids, such as the olive oils, for example, the fish are really good in terms avocado. So that's probably the good oils. And then you've got protein, which is probably a quarter of the plate, and all depending on what your goals are. And then that portion of the plate that's essential fatty acids is like the salmon, the oily fishes, the salmon, the mackerel, the sardines, the anchovies. The oily fishes are fantastic sources of essential fatty acids. And then you've got your olive oil, your avocado. They're really good, oils. And then you've got your carbohydrates, which you want your carbohydrates to be whole. You don't want simplified carbohydrates where I guess the husk is removed or the fiber is removed. The fiber serves a really important part in terms of feeding the gut microbiome. So I know we're going to be talking about that later on, but we want to be eating whole carbohydrates and not refined carbohydrates.
So what are some of the whole carbohydrates that we have to be eating, and what are some of the refined carbs that we tend to eat and not realize that we shouldn't be eating?
Yeah, so it's like pasta, for example. So pasta is really refined wheat, or it could be coming from another source. Yeah. It's like rice, white rice, for example, where it's it's been processed so that the hard fiber has been removed. So eating brown rice is better than white rice. Eating whole wheat or the grains such as buckwheat, amaranth, quinoa are much better than having like the refined version. So again, like if you get to oats, for example, like steel cut oats are unadulterated oats, right? But they need a fair bit of heating in order for us to be able to eat them.
Yeah.
So the next version of that is rolled oats. And so rolled oats is better than quick oats. Quick oats is the most refined version. Mm-hmm. So the more we go down the refining process, the more it becomes more that simple carbohydrates where the fiber's removed and we get blood sugar spikes. And because we don't have the fiber slows down the absorption of the carbohydrate. So it's really important to have it with the fiber. That way we don't get the sugar spikes. The sugar spikes are really what causes blood sugar dysregulation. It causes metabolic diseases. So we certainly don't want the spikes in sugar. And by eating whole forms of carbohydrates, such as legumes is another one. So the beans family, legumes, and eating all the other grains that I mentioned, but in their whole forms.
I'm going to be honest with you. This is bad news to me. I love my pasta. I love my pasta. I love my white rice. And when you mentioned oats, I was like, oh, great. I love oats. And then you're like, Quake oats is the probably the most refined one. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah. So it's a really good point that you raise, Marie, is that I don't want to scare anyone off, because health's a journey, just like my evolution through personal development's been a journey. And what it is, it's about just changing little things over a period of time and constantly changing and refining and improving. And I'm still changing my diet today. Yeah. So I've been on this journey ever since I was in primary school, refining my diet. And so it's been a lifelong journey. And so what I'm mentioning is certainly not to be, scaring people and think, oh, no, I'm doing everything wrong. That's not it. What you can have pasta, you can have rice, but just don't overdo it. Don't have half the plate rice, white rice, or half the plate pasta, for example. That is overdoing it. So it's the Goldilocks principle is what I live by. So not too much, not too little, just right.
I love that. That makes it very easy to remember. So could you tell us a bit more about the relationship between our gut health and our mental health? How does the digestive system impact our mood and overall well-being?
It has a big impact. So I often have people come to me complaining of digestive issues, and then I find underlying that is a mental health condition. So there's a direct link through the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, and it links the brain to the enteric nervous system. So the enteric nervous system is an independent nervous system, and so it's a brain itself, right? It's a brain. It's got sensory neurons. It's got motor neurons, and so it can make its own decisions. And so it's linked via the vagus nerve, and that's a two-way communication between the brain and the gut, two ways. So there's a bidirectional relationship. And so what we think about can impact how we digest food. So if we're stressed, that will implicate our digestion. So often I have clients come to me complaining about bloating or just can't digest food. It just sits there for hours. And often they're just really stressed. And so when we're stressed, our digestive system gets down-regulated. And so it doesn't work as efficiently. And so we need to be relaxed when we're eating in order to improve digestion.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. That answers so many questions for me. I feel like I'm going through that right now, where I'm so stressed and my digestive system just isn't really being as productive as it once was, to put it in nice terms. So what advice do you have for that?
Yeah, so it's really getting back to the basics.
Yeah.
And that's traditionally how our grandparents used to eat, which was around the table, we'd sit down, we would take a moment to say some grace and, express some gratitude, which calms the nervous system when we're grateful. Yeah. And so that calms the nervous system. When we have a calm nervous system, that turns on our digestive system, and our digestive system is ready. And digestion starts with food preparation. And so this is another thing that's been stripped away from us is fast food. We don't prepare our food anymore. And so when we're preparing the food in the kitchen, our body, or our sensory neurons are picking up information such as smell, maybe tasting a bit of the food. We can certainly see the food. And then that tells the digestive system to start secreting or manufacturing the enzymes required to break down that food. And so just preparing the food is getting our digestive system ready. So food preparation, really important. And if you're not preparing your food, it's just having a pause, taking a breath, relaxing before eating, and then eating it slowly. So our digestion starts in the mouth. So when we're chewing, that's the start of the digestive process. It really starts probably out of the mouth when we're preparing the food, but if we're not preparing the food, then it starts in the mouth. So really slowing down, how you're eating, and chewing lots. Chewing really till the food's absolutely liquid is fundamental. And then staying in a relaxed state. So don't read any news that will be agitating. Don't watch the news that's going to be agitating. Don't have any agitating conversations. Have light, sort of humorous, conversational, that enables you to slow down your eating, so you eat slower, and you're chewing your food is really fundamental.
That's really interesting. I never knew that there was a correlation there. And it's also way too easy these days to just put on the news, or not even the news, like a TV show that's going to be very just depressing and heart-wrenching while eating your food. And that probably doesn't help either. So it's probably best to switch off the media, any type of media, the screens, and just have some time alone with your food. And that will help with the slowing down and helping with the digestive system. But with regards to mental health, in what ways can our nutrition contribute to the prevention or management of mental health conditions like anxiety or depression?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it comes down to us eating too much carbohydrates, essentially. So sugar is evil for the neurons, right? It kills neurons, sugar. So, and when I say sugar, I mean refined carbohydrates, excessive consumption of them. So it's not moderate consumption or low consumption. It's that excessive consumption and constantly consuming refined carbohydrates coming from soda drinks, such as soft drinks, also coming from the energy drinks, coming from lollies and all the sweets and all those sort of things. So we just eat far too much of that. Our body's not designed to manage that flood of sugar, and so it creates a sugar spike. It creates excessive consumption will create inflammation. That will create inflammation in the brain. And that inflammation in the brain is what leads us to, just feeling like, so for example, excess sugar, that flood of sugar will, spike and we'll get sort of hyper. We get that sort of hyperactive sort of response. Yeah. And, we just got so much energy and we go in hyperactive mode. So it's not good. And then, prolonged sugar over long periods of time will really start to affect our neurons, and this will then flow on to other neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia long term.
And does the timing and or frequency of our meals and snacks throughout the day affect our mental energy levels as well? Absolutely.
So we eat too much too often, and our digestive system doesn't get a break. It's constantly working. It doesn't get a good chance to repair itself. And this is why time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, the 5 and 2, all those sort of allowing the digestive system a break are really showing to be beneficial to us, because we weren't designed to constantly graze on food. We had to hunt for our food. We had periods of famine between one meal and the next because there was no food available around us at the time. So we had to forage for it. We had to go hunt. We had to walk for it. And so we're designed to actually have long periods without food. But in today's world, food's everywhere, and the advertising's constantly popping up on our screens. We smell it because someone else is eating it. And physiologically, we're wired to, if it's around, to eat it. And this is again, this sort of mental sort of struggle we have is that we know we don't need it, but we just do it. And it's because that's hardwired into us. When the food's around, we eat, and we eat because we don't know when the next meal's going to be. But in today's world, the food's always around. We don't have any famine. So this is why these time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting are really taking off, because it's helping our body to, repair the digestive system and to better regulate sugar. And when we better regulate sugar, we're not as anxious. We've got more clarity. We can think clearly. And so, again, it really comes down to not eating frequently, having a break between meals, and not eating too much. And when we are eating slowly and eating whole foods is really key. So it is really, in a simplistic, we're just getting back to fundamentals of how we used to eat, and hence why the paleo diet's taking off and all this.
And with everything that you've just shared with us, does it vary between different age groups, and what are the specific considerations?
Yeah, so as we get older, beyond that sort of maturation of 25 years, our digestive system becomes impaired as we go through the decades. And so it's not as efficient as what it was between 0 and 25. And so our stomach acid is a bit higher. It's not as low, or it's not optimal where it should be. And so we struggle to break down the proteins, yet we still have a requirement, a large requirement for protein as we get older. And so so all our systems are slowly sort of degenerating, and they become more and more inefficient. The other one is the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So that fuels us. So the mitochondria is the powerhouse. It determines, our energy levels, and that declines as we age as well. And so we need to work with the mitochondria in order to drive its efficiency. To work with the mitochondria, we need to cut down on carbohydrates. And this is why these low carb diets are being so effective, because our mitochondria improves. It starts to become more efficient. We feel more energy. And because our brain is densely populated with mitochondria, it demands a lot of energy, a lot of mitochondria there. And so if our mitochondria are operating more efficiently, we can think clearly, we can think sharper, and we are able to function better, and we feel better about ourselves. And so when we've got a degeneration of the mitochondria, then our neurons aren't being fueled. They're not firing as well. They're not, they're not manufacturing the neurotransmitters in order to talk between neurons and all this, cross communication. And so this is where we get the chemical imbalance happening, simply because the energy system is just not working well. And in depressed people, it has been correlated to low mitochondria function. So, for depressed people, for highly anxious people, cut down the sugar, cut down the caffeine, and watch your body start to regenerate itself by just simply.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, please finish your sentence there.
Yeah, so the body will start to heal itself, essentially. Yeah. When we work with it, it will do what it knows what to do best, and that's to heal and to work optimally.
Yeah, sorry for jumping in before, but I was just going to agree with you so hard on like the caffeine thing and the sugar thing as well, because I feel like my anxiety levels have been a lot better since I cut down on the caffeine, went from like 2 or 3 coffees to 1 max a day, sometimes not even any a day, which was difficult, very, very difficult. And I was definitely having withdrawal symptoms initially, but it's a lot better now, feel a lot more relaxed. So I can definitely vouch for that. But with regards to like making all of these dietary changes, what are some challenges that people might face, and how would you recommend getting through that?
Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier, is don't get too carried away with thinking you got to change everything overnight, because nothing will happen. It becomes too big of a mountain to climb, so we won't do it. We will do small steps and incremental steps. So it's really focusing on that area that just as you mentioned, Marie, that you knew that caffeine was just creeping up, and you thought, I'm just drinking too much of it, I'm going to start to cut back on it. And so it's those areas that the person will know, the person listening to this will know the area that they're having too much of. It could be too much alcohol. It could be too much carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates. It could be too much fried food. Whatever you're having too much of, then just making a conscious effort, just like you did, Marie, just to wean it back wean it back and slowly bring it back. And then you'll start to notice the benefits and you'll be able to stick with that change. It's when we try to change everything overnight and we just think, oh, this is too much, it's too overwhelming, we actually become stressful. It's bad for our mental health. It's distressing for us when we take everything away from us. So what we want to do is just slowly wean things, reduce things if they're in excess. And if we're not having enough essential fats or not having enough protein in our diet, then we want to look at bringing that up. And so it's really getting to that Goldilocks principle of, reducing the things that are too much, increasing the things that are too little to get to just right.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now we're moving on to the questions from the audience. And our first question for you is, what are some major scientific facts supporting the link between nutrition and mental health?
Yeah, so I did touch on that before. We certainly know the vagus nerve connects both the brain to the enteric nervous system, and it's a bidirectional communication. And we know that the gut has an influence on the brain. So when we eat, for example, we produce serotonin, and serotonin makes us feel good. And so when we start to feel good, and hence that has an influence on how we feel in our brain, because we have the sensory perception of, that feels good, and so therefore I start to feel better. And that's why some people emotionally eat, because they're distressed. They know that when they eat food, they feel a bit better, and that's the two-way communication. So there's lots of publications around the gut-brain axis and the gut microbiota and its influence on the gut-brain axis. We also know that when someone has a low vagal tone, there's not a strong two-directional or bidirectional communication, and that person can have severe digestion issues. So we know that the vagal tone will result in digestive issues, IBS-related symptoms. And so we can modulate this or improve it by increasing the vagal tone. And there's many ways in which we can do that. We can do it through laughing. We can do it through singing. We can do it through gargling. We can do it through acupuncture. We can do it through meditation. We could actually do it through putting our head in a ice bath or cold water, so we can activate that vagal tone. So we definitely know there's lots of relations between the gut and the brain, and the most primitive level between the brain and the gut, and we talk about the gut instinct, is the gut instinct's a real primitive survival link. So when we think, I really want that, it is the gut saying that's attractive to eat. And it could be a person, for example. When we infatuate over a person and we just think, that's the dream relationship, then we just want to consume them, right? We just can't get enough of them. And so that's the gut instinct. That's the gut instinct wanting to consume. And also we know when we don't like a person, we get a funny feeling in our gut, and that's the gut instinct away. And so we have within the gut, like the duodenum, the top part of the gut, is us wanting something to consume. It's good for us. And then the lower part of our digestive tract, such as the large intestine, is we want to expel things. We want to get people out of our lives. We want to get toxins out of our body. And so we know that through scientific research.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very good illustration of that's the major scientific facts between nutrition and mental health. Our second question is there such a thing as too much protein? Is there a recommended daily protein intake for someone who's working out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I see there's a big push for people to consume more protein. And so there's a lot of collagen products out of there. There's lots of protein powders and vegan protein powders, and there's heaps of push. There's a big protein push. And so people realize that if they consume protein, they feel less hungry, and so they end up consuming overall less calories. So it is a weight loss strategy, but it's not a good long-term strategy, excess protein consumption, because our body can only excrete a certain level of, I guess, that acidic load that the protein breaks down into. And so what happens is if we consume too much protein, we go into a state of acidosis, and that is really dangerous for the body. The body will then start to, it'll start leaching from bone to buffer the low pH in the blood. And again, that's when we start to get our bones, like osteoporosis conditions, when we have extremely high diets of protein or high acid load diets. So we certainly don't want to do excessive amounts. We want the Goldilocks principle. In terms of someone that works out, a good rule of thumb, without knowing what sort of workout you're doing and what your goal is, a good rule of thumb is 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So if you're 70 kilograms, then 70 grams of protein per day. And then you're best to split that 70 grams over your 3 meals a day. So you're consuming somewhere between 15 to 20 grams per meal, 3 meals a day to get that 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. But then I really don't know if the person's what sort of workout they're doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering the audience questions. We hope that we've answered them well. So we're moving on to the open mic section now. And this is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about that doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you. It's an area that I've been going down a rabbit hole in, and it's quantum healing. So it's understanding biology beyond the atomic level, so getting down into the subatomic level. And we're starting to understand why intermittent fasting, why time-restricted feeding actually works. We're understanding now why the keto diet actually works due to this understanding of biology at the subatomic level. And also the other thing that ties in with this is circadian biology. We're better understanding the role the sun plays in our health and well-being. And I touched on this a bit earlier in terms of eating foods based on where you are locally. And so those foods have a signature that's taken from the sun, like a barcode from the sun. And it tells the body, what sort of season, the time of the day and all that sort of stuff based on the foods we eat, as well as getting the sunlight. So it really helps keep our body in sync in terms of our circadian clock. And every cell in our body is run by this circadian clock. But getting down to what I was saying around better understanding of time-restricted feeding and how fasting is helping us and how keto diet is helping us. And it gets down to the mitochondria and how the mitochondria works. And so the mitochondria doesn't like high deuterium, and deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. And so the body prefers protium, which is proton, just the proton within the hydrogen, and that is H2O. But what we're understanding, deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, and that's D2O, and that is starting to show that it's having a big impact on health and disease, and on depression, and on anxiety, and on cancer, and on cardiovascular disease, is this deuterium. And so an emerging field that's going to pop up in the next decade is this quantum level of understanding of health, so below the atomic level. And so listeners will start to hear more about low deuterium foods, and then we'll start to understand that low deuterium foods are foods that are low in carbohydrates, essentially. And so this is why we're starting to understand why the low carbohydrate diet is working as well. So I'm really intrigued in this area because it's giving understanding to why these certain protocols work. And I'm not someone to do things unless I understand the why. So with the why now, I'm starting to make these changes myself.
That is fascinating to me. And with that in mind, do you see any misconceptions or myths that are going to emerge with this emerging field?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good question. And so I think one of the it does get down to that Goldilocks principle too, because deuterium is naturally residing on planet Earth, right? So it resides at a certain level in planet Earth. It only becomes a problem in the human body when it's in excess. And so it gets back to that Goldilocks principle. So it's not that, like, from the deuterium story, you could say carbohydrates is evil. But in saying that, it's excessive amounts. It's not really, so if we eat moderate amounts, and what I think we're going to realize is that we probably need to consume less carbohydrates than what we're currently consuming.
Yeah.
And that's hard because that works against our hard wiring. Just wants carbohydrates because it's fast fuel for us, right? Yeah. So it enables us to get that tiger. It enables that. Yeah. So
it's also like potatoes didn't have to taste this good.
And this is it. So we're hardwired to eat these foods that are highly calorific, that have a high energy density, and that's a survival mechanism that's wired into us, and it's why you love pasta and potatoes. It's hardwired into all of us, and this becomes challenging for us, particularly when it's all around us all the time, and because you think when we're out hunting and gathering. We didn't have all this stuff around us, and we had to actually work hard to actually make these products. And some of these products we didn't make because we had to keep moving around because of the changing seasons and whatnot and varying climate conditions. So it's a very challenging environment which we live in today in order to be healthy. And what I guess where the health science is going now is getting back to more traditional practices, such as this is why the saunas are taking off, because saunas is a way we sweat out deuterium. Okay, so when we sweat out deuterium. When we go to the toilet, we do a number 2. We get it out. We also, when we do a number 1, we also remove deuterium. When we breathe, we move deuterium. So it's really finding, again, the Goldilocks principle of not too much, not too little, but just right. Okay. And I don't want to scare the listeners, but it's an emerging field that they'll be intrigued to. They're going to hear more about it as the years go on, and it's certainly an area that I'm digging deep into at the moment.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today and for your foresight. If our listeners want to find out more about you, your work, and what you do, where can they go?
My website, which I know is going to be included in the show notes, is probably the best place to go. There's a lot of resources. I have a podcast, I have a YouTube channel, and I'm blogging every week. So there's lots of free material on the website. So I suggest the listeners go to my website, which is in the show notes.
All right, great. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Remember, everything in moderation, the Goldilocks rule, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Self-Improvement Atlas, the Personal Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pe.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.